The elderly black man brushed dust off the $5 painting, smiling gently. "Just needs a little love," he whispered as the seller laughed. "Take it, old man. It's trash." But something about the faded signature tugged at him. He carried it home, unaware of its secret. The next morning, an art appraiser stared at the painting in shock. He whispered, "Sir, do you know what you have here?" The old man had no idea his life was about to change forever. Before we begin, subscribe to our channel and comment where you are watching from so we can bring more stories like these. By the time most folks on Willow Ridge Lane were waking up, Mr. Thomas Avery had already finished his first cup of tea, said his morning prayer, and was halfway through talking to his tomato plants. "Now listen here," he mumbled as he pinched a yellowing leaf between his fingers. "Y'all can't be getting shy on me now. Sun's shining, soil's good, no excuses." The small backyard behind his modest, slightly sagging house wasn't much. A rectangle of patchy grass, a leaning fence, and a garden bed he'd built out of old wood planks. But it was his favorite place on earth. The sky was still that early pale blue, the kind that feels soft on your eyes. Birds hopped along the fence, chirping like they were gossiping about the old man and his plants. His knees cracked when he knelt, but he lowered himself anyway, slow and careful, like you do when you're used to pain but refuse to surrender to it. He wore the same cardigan he always did in the mornings, the faded gray-brown one with the thinning elbows and a little snag on the left cuff. His late wife Lorna had knitted it for him a long time ago, back when their biggest worry was if the kids would ever stop leaving toys in the hallway. Those days felt like a different life. He brushed a bit of dirt off his dark, wrinkled hands and smiled as he saw a tiny new bud pushing through. "Look at you," he whispered. "God, it's still working, huh?" He sat back on his heels for a moment and just breathed. The world had gotten louder over the years. Faster, meaner. But out here, with the smell of damp soil and the gentle buzz of a neighboring lawnmower in the distance, he could almost forget how the inside of his house felt. Almost. He glanced up at the back kitchen window. No movement. No light yet. His children, well, the kids he'd adopted and raised as his own, usually woke up late, glued to their phones before they even brushed their teeth. He remembered when they were small, how they'd race through this same backyard barefoot, squealing, "Daddy, Daddy, look," every 5 seconds. Michael with skinned knees, Jasmine with her wild pigtails, little Devin dragging his blanket like a cape. He'd worked 3 different jobs back then. Janitor during the day, security at night, stocking shelves on weekends. Never once did he complain. He'd come home exhausted, feet screaming, back tight, but the kids would run into his arms, and it made every sore muscle feel worth it. Back then, they'd fight over who got to sit in his lap. Now, they barely noticed if he left the room. He planted his hands on his thighs and pushed himself up with a soft groan. "Well, these knees ain't what they used to be," he muttered, smiling anyway. He gave the garden one last look, then shuffled back toward the back door, wiping his hands on his jeans. The screen door squeaked when he opened it, a sound he'd always meant to fix but never did. It sounded like home. Inside, the house felt different, quieter but not peaceful, just cold. He stepped into the small kitchen and set the kettle back on the stove. The counters were clean. He'd wiped them down twice last night, out of habit. The fridge hummed softly. A single magnet held up an old photo. All 3 kids, much younger, crowded around him on the porch, grinning with missing teeth and sticky faces from melted popsicles. He touched the corner of the photo gently. "Look at y'all," he whispered. "Didn't know you'd grow up so fast, and so far." He pulled out a pan and cracked some eggs into it, whisking them up. Toast into the toaster. A few slices of tomato from his own garden laid neatly on a plate. He didn't know if anyone would eat, but he cooked anyway. That's what he did. He gave. He always had. Footsteps thumped down the hallway. Devin showed up first, hoodie halfway on, headphones around his neck, eyes on his phone. "Morning, son," Thomas said, voice warm. Devin opened the cabinet, grabbed a bowl, and poured cereal without looking up. "Hey," he mumbled. "You want some eggs?" Thomas offered. "I made 'em the way you like. Little cheese, little pepper." Devin glanced at the pan, then shrugged. "Nah, I'm good. Trying to cut back on, heavy stuff." "But last week you said—" "Yeah, last week," Devin cut in, bored. "Things change, Dad." Dad. He still called him that. It hurt that the word had lost its weight. Devin walked out of the kitchen, cereal in hand, already back in his own world. A moment later, Jasmine appeared, heels on, hair done, makeup sharp. She wore a blazer like she was heading to a board meeting instead of a mid-level office job she hated. "Morning, baby girl," Thomas said, smiling. She wrinkled her nose. "Oh, is that eggs again?" she said. "Dad, the whole house smells like grease." Thomas glanced at the pan. "Just a little butter. I thought y'all might want—" "You don't have to cook so much," she said, pulling a bottle of cold brew from the fridge. "We're not kids anymore." He nodded, his smile dimming just a little. Right. Habit, I guess." "Well, break it," she said, already texting on her phone. "I'm trying not to smell like a diner when I go out." She left without saying goodbye. The eggs sat in the pan, quietly overcooked. A few minutes later, Michael came down. Neatly pressed shirt, tie loosened, keys in hand. He checked his watch, annoyed. "Is the water bill paid?" he asked immediately. "Yes, sir," Thomas said. "Took care of it yesterday." "And the electric?" "Paid that last week." Michael nodded like this was simply expected. "Good. We can't have you forgetting that. They shut anything off, it goes on my credit." Thomas swallowed. "I ain't never missed a—" Michael didn't respond. He grabbed a piece of toast, took a bite, then made a face. "You didn't put enough butter on this." Thomas reached for the butter knife. "I can—" "Forget it," Michael said, dropping the toast back on the plate. "I'll grab something on the way." He turned toward the door. "Michael?" Thomas tried quietly. "You got enough gas? I can transfer—" "We're fine," he snapped. "Your pension already covers most of the house anyway. Just don't mess anything up." The front door closed behind him, leaving the kitchen too quiet again. Thomas stared at the half-eaten toast. "They grown," he whispered to himself. "Life's heavy. They just stressed." He repeated it like he always did. Like a prayer. Like an excuse. He turned off the stove, scooped the eggs onto his own plate, and sat alone at the small table by the window. He bowed his head and whispered his usual grace. "Thank you, Lord, for this food. Thank you for this home. Watch over my children. Shine a little kindness on their hearts. Amen." He ate slowly, listening to the distant hum of cars, the faint noise of a TV from a neighbor's house, the ticking of the cheap wall clock. After breakfast, he washed the dishes, carefully, methodically, the way his mother taught him. If you're gonna do a thing, do it right. He wiped counters that were dirty, straightened chairs that were already straight, anything to keep his hands busy, because when his hands were still, his heart had too much room to ache. Later, he stepped onto the small front porch, easing himself into the old wooden chair he'd repaired 3 times. The neighborhood moved around him, kids biking past, A mail truck stopping down the road. A dog barking at a squirrel. "Morning, Thomas," a familiar voice called. He looked up and smiled. "Afternoon, Miss Jennings," he said. "I'm a little behind today." Mrs. Carla Jennings, with her soft eyes and floral apron, leaned on the low fence between their houses. "You out here babysitting the street again?" she teased. "Somebody gotta make sure it behaves," he chuckled. She tilted her head, studying him. "You eat yet?" "Yes, ma'am." "Kids treating you right?" she asked carefully. He hesitated a split second, then smiled. "They're just stressed," he said. "They'll come around." She frowned. She'd heard that line too many times. "You're a good man, Thomas," she said. "Don't let them forget that. And don't you forget it either." He nodded. But deep down, something was fraying. He could feel it. They didn't see him, didn't hear him, didn't value him. To them, he was just there. Background. Old. Broke. Useless. That was the story they decided to believe. And he let them believe it. Because he thought protecting them from the truth was love. Because he thought shielding them from who he really was would somehow make their lives easier. He looked back at the house he'd paid off with overtime shifts and cheap dinners. The house where he was now treated like a guest overstaying his welcome. He sighed and whispered so only God could hear. "Just a little longer. They'll come around." But the truth was already on its way, in the shape of a black SUV. A sharp suit, and a man who knew exactly who Thomas Avery really was. It didn't all fall apart in one day. It never does. It was the little things first. The everyday moments that looked harmless from far away, but up close were like paper cuts. Small but constant, and always in the same place. Day after day, those cuts started hurting more than Thomas Avery would ever admit. The first one that week was about the food. Thomas loved cooking. It made him feel useful, needed. It reminded him of when the kids were little and used to bounce in their chairs chanting, "Dinner, dinner, dinner," like it was a holiday every night. So that evening, he went all out. Smothered chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with a little garlic and butter, cornbread from scratch. He hummed as he cooked, moving slow but steady, adding seasoning like an artist, tasting as he went. Lorna would approve of this one, he murmured, smiling at the memory of his wife. He set the table, laid out plates, poured sweet tea, and called out into the house. "Dinner's ready." Devin came first, AirPods in, thumbs flying over his phone screen. He plopped down at the table. "What's this?" he asked, squinting at the plate. "Just a little something I whipped up," Thomas said proudly. "Been a minute since we sat down together." Devin poked the chicken with his fork like it had offended him. "You put gravy on everything?" "That's how your mama used to make it," Thomas replied, smile softening. "Yeah, well, she didn't have to worry about carbs," Devin muttered. "This is like crazy heavy, Dad. You trying to clog arteries or what?" Before Thomas could respond, Jasmine walked in, heels clicking, phone in hand, mid-conversation. "Girl, hold on," she told whoever was on the line. She lowered the phone and looked at the table. "Dad, what is this? A Thanksgiving plate?" Thomas chuckled. "Just supper, sweetheart," she sighed. "You can't just keep cooking whatever you want and expect us to eat it. I told you I'm watching what I eat." "You don't have to eat a lot," he said, tone gentle. "Just thought y'all might like a home-cooked meal." Michael appeared last, tie loose, jaw already tense. He looked at the plates and frowned. "We talked about this," he said. "You don't have to cook. We can manage our own food." "I like cooking for my family," Thomas said. It's something I can still do." Michael shook his head. Yeah, well, we end up throwing half of it away. Devin snorted. For real. Jasmine picked at her food, then pushed the plate away. This is too salty. Thomas's fingers tightened around his fork. I'll do better next time, he murmured. There doesn't need to be a next time, Michael said. Just stop overdoing it. You're wasting our groceries. Like Thomas wasn't the one whose pension covered most of the bills. He looked at the table, at the food he'd spent hours preparing, and suddenly wasn't hungry anymore. The next cut came the following day. Thomas stood by the front door, adjusting his cardigan before heading out to tend the garden. The fabric was worn, but it was comfortable. And it still smelled faintly, if he really tried, like Lorna's old perfume from the last time she hugged him in it. As he passed the hallway mirror, he gave himself a quick once-over and nodded. Still hanging in there, old man, he muttered with a tired grin. Voices drifted from the living room. Jasmine had company. 2 co-workers, dressed sharp, laughing as they sank into the sofa. Thomas heard his name floated mid-conversation. Yeah, he just lives here, Jasmine was saying. My dad, well, adoptive dad, he's old school. One of the friends laughed. Aw, that's sweet. Built-in babysitter, huh? Jasmine scoffed. More like built-in bill. Man eats our money and watches old shows all day. Thomas froze in the hallway. Eats our money. He looked down at his hands. Those same hands had paid off this house, had gone without so the kids could have new shoes, school trips, clothes they were proud of. He stepped into the doorway with a soft smile anyway. Afternoon, he said. Y'all doing okay? One of Jasmine's co-workers turned and gave him a polite nod. Jasmine glanced over her shoulder, then her eyes widened slightly. Not out of affection, but out of irritation. Oh, Dad, she said quickly, standing up. We were just chatting. We're kind of in the middle of something. He nodded. I was just heading to the garden. Didn't mean to intrude. He took a step into the living room. Jasmine moved in front of him. Actually, she lowered her voice, but not enough. Can you, go to your room for a bit? We don't really want people walking through while we're hanging out. His heart squeezed. Your room? He repeated. You mean the storage room at the back? It's more yours than anywhere else, she said quickly. I mean, the house is cramped as it is. Cramped. He'd spent years building this cramped. He nodded slowly. Of course, baby. Y'all enjoy. He turned away, missing the way one coworker looked uncomfortable and the other stared down at the floor. Back in his small back room, a bed, a dresser, and a few old boxes crammed into the corners, Thomas sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to them laughing in the next room. He smiled sadly. They're just stressed, he whispered. They don't mean nothing by it. A couple days later, Mrs. Carla Jennings caught him outside again. He was carrying a bag of trash to the curb, moving a little slower than usual. The afternoon sun was warm, but he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with age. Thomas, she called out, you look like you're carrying the whole world in that bag. He chuckled, but the sound was thin. Just taking out the trash. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I heard them other day, talking about you, saying you eat their money. He flinched, just a little. She saw it. That ain't right, she said firmly. Not after everything you did for them kids. He shrugged one shoulder. They're grown now. Bills pile up. Tempers run high. You always make excuses for them, she said softly. At some point, you gotta admit they're choosing to be cruel. He took a long breath. They're just stressed, he repeated. They'll come around. Carla studied his face, the faint shine in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched while his voice stayed gentle. What are you hiding, Thomas? She asked quietly. 'Cause I get the feeling you got more going on than anybody knows. He swallowed and looked away toward the house. I ain't hiding nothing but my hurt, he said slowly. That wasn't entirely true, and they both knew it. That night, when the house was finally quiet, Thomas closed his door softly and sat at the small desk in his room. He reached for the shoebox, tucked behind a stack of old blankets in the closet. Inside it were letters on thick paper, embossed with logos, official envelopes with Avery and Lane Logistics Inc. printed in the bank documents, shareholder notices, phone numbers with words like board chair and legal counsel scribbled next to them. His reading glasses sat low on his nose as he unfolded one letter. Dear Mr. Avery, as majority shareholder, your presence at the upcoming board meeting remains critical. He skimmed it, then set it down. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered quietly. Hello? Mr. Avery? This is Martin Caldwell, from the firm. We've been trying to reach you regarding your vote on the expansion proposal. The board is getting anxious. Thomas glanced at the closed bedroom door, as if his children could hear through it. I know, son, he said into the receiver. I got your messages. I just needed time. We can send a car for you, Martin offered. Whenever you're ready, sir. Your voice still carries weight, whether you're in the office or not. Thomas's eyes glistened. He'd walked away from that life when Lorna died, chose his children over corporate titles, stock prices, and boardrooms. He never regretted the choice. But now, he regretted that they didn't value the choice he made. That won't be necessary tonight, he said gently. I'll be in touch soon. He hung up and stared at the letters. If his kids knew he was co-founder, majority shareholder, a man with more money than they'd ever imagined, would they treat him better or worse? The answer scared him. He folded the letters, placed them back in the box, and slid it deep into the closet again. They see me as old and broke, he murmured. Maybe that's safer. He lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The house didn't feel like his anymore. The room barely did. But he clung to one hope. They're just stressed, he whispered again into the darkness. They'll come around. He didn't know the decision had already been made. Not by him, by them. A week later, he overheard it. They thought he was asleep. Michael's voice came from the kitchen, sharp and irritated. We can't keep doing this. Doing what? Jasmine asked. Taking care of him, Michael said. Paying all these bills, dealing with his stuff. It's too much. Devin added, Real talk. I got friends living on their own with roommates and less money than us. We're feeding an extra person for no reason. Extra? Mrs. Jennings would have snapped if she'd been there to hear it. Jasmine sighed. So what do we do? Kick him out? That's crazy. Michael's reply was cold. He's not our real dad. We don't owe him our whole lives. Devin muttered, Facts. Thomas stood in the hallway, back pressed to the wall, heart pounding in his chest. His legs shook. He heard Jasmine again, quieter this time. I mean, it's not like he can't figure something out. He's been living off us long enough. Exactly, Michael said. I want my space back. We need that room. I'm done feeling guilty about it. Thomas felt something in his chest tear, something that had stretched and stretched and stretched for years, trying to hold everything together. They weren't just stressed anymore. They had made a decision, and they'd made it without him. He slipped back into his room, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed, hands on his knees. His eyes were wet, but strangely calm. So that's how it is, he whispered. Out in the kitchen, footsteps moved, cabinet doors closed, and life went on. Unaware that the man who'd given them everything had just heard them vote him out of their lives. They wanted the room back. They wanted him gone. And soon, very soon, They were going to tell him, out loud, in front of witnesses, not knowing that when they did, truth would pull up to the curb in a black SUV and change everything. The morning they decided to break him started like any other. That was the cruelest part. The sun came up, soft and golden. Birds chirped. A breeze moved through the thin curtains in Thomas's small back room. For a few minutes, before his eyes fully opened, he forgot. He forgot the muffled voices he'd heard the night before. Forgot the words extra person and we don't owe him anything. Forgot the way his heart had twisted while they planned his exit in the next room. Habit got him up. He sat on the edge of the bed, joints protesting, and whispered the same simple prayer he'd whispered for years. Thank you, Lord, for another day. Watch over my children. Help me be good to them, even if they ain't good to me. Amen. He stood, smoothed his old cardigan, and shuffled into the hallway. The house smelled like nothing yet. No coffee, no toast, no air freshener, just the slightly stale air of people who were tired of each other. He didn't cook that morning, didn't put eggs in the dell, didn't slice tomatoes, didn't brew a big pot of coffee. He filled 1 cup for himself, sat at the small kitchen table, and drank it slowly, eyes on the thin line of light creeping across the floor. He knew what was coming. He'd heard enough in the kitchen last night to understand. They were done with him. Half an hour later, footsteps sounded upstairs. A door opened, then another. Whispered voices, heavy steps on the stairs. All 3 of them appeared at once. Michael in a pressed shirt and slacks. Jasmine in leggings and an oversized tee, hair wrapped up. Devin in sweatpants and a hoodie, phone already in his hand. They didn't spread out the way they usually did. One rummaging in the fridge, another checking the mirror, another rushing to the door. They came as a group, and they stood across from him at the table. Thomas set his cup down gently. "Morning," he said softly. Nobody replied. Michael cleared his throat. "Dad," he started, voice flat. "We need to talk." Thomas folded his hands on the table. "All right, son, I'm listening." Jasmine crossed her arms, eyes avoiding his. Devon stared at a spot on the wall, jaw clenched. Michael continued, posture stiff. "We've been talking about this for a while," he said, "and we've decided it's time for some changes." Thomas nodded slowly. "Okay, what kind of changes?" Michael didn't flinch. "You need to pack your things," he said. "We want the room back." The words landed heavy, even though Thomas had expected them. Hearing them out loud, from the mouth of the boy he'd once rocked through fevers and midnight terrors, still felt like somebody had kicked his chest in. He swallowed. "Pack my things," he repeated quietly. "You want me to leave?" Devon shifted his weight. "It's not like that." Jasmine added quickly, "We just need more space. We're adults now. We can't keep babysitting, you know?" Thomas's brows pulled together, hurt flickering across his face. "Babysitting?" "You don't work," Michael said. "You don't pay the mortgage. We're carrying everything." "My pension," Thomas began. "Doesn't count as you working," Michael snapped. "That's just money that comes in. We're the ones doing everything now." Thomas looked at his hands. Those hands had once carried all 3 of them at once, one on his back, one in his arms, one holding his hand. Now, apparently, they didn't do anything. "Please," he said quietly, "just let me stay until I find somewhere. I won't be in your way. I'll stay in the room mostly. I can?" Jasmine rolled her eyes. "This house already feels crowded with you, Dad." "And it's not like we asked to be your retirement plan," Devin muttered. Thomas lifted his gaze slowly. You think I depend on y'all? He asked, voice shaking, not with anger, but with heartbreak. Michael lifted his chin. You eat our food. You use our electricity. You sit here all day. We're supposed to, what, take care of you until you die? The words sliced deeper than they knew. Thomas leaned back in his chair as if the weight of them physically pushed him. I gave you a home, he whispered. I gave you this home. You adopted us, Jasmine said sharply. We're grateful, okay? But that doesn't mean we owe you our whole lives. Devin nodded. Yeah, you're not even our real dad. The room spun for a second. That one cut past flesh and bone and went straight for his soul. He stared at them, eyes glassy. No, he said softly. I ain't your real dad by blood. You right about that. He swallowed hard. But I sat in them courtrooms. I signed them papers. I promised to be your father. And I meant it. Michael shifted, discomfort flickering for just a moment before it hardened again. Look, he said, voice cooling. We're not saying you have to leave today. Devin cut in. But packing today would be a good start. A bitter little laugh slipped out of Thomas before he could stop it. He shook his head. Where I'm supposed to go? He asked. You think there's a line of folks waiting to house old widowers? Jasmine sighed. You can find something. A senior home, a room somewhere. You're not helpless. I'm your father, he said again, like maybe repeating it would make it mean something. Biologically, no, Michael corrected. That did it. The trembling inside his chest turned into full-on shaking in his hands. His breath came shorter. His heart pounded against his ribs. He pushed himself up from the table slowly, palms pressed flat on the wood. After everything I did for you, he began. Oh my God, here we go, Jasmine muttered under her breath. I never thought I'd see the day you'd throw me out my own house, he finished. Devin scoffed. You've said that like 100 times. My house. The deed's in our names now. That was true. He'd signed it over years ago. Because he trusted them. Because he believed love meant giving everything. He felt lightheaded. Don't do this, he pleaded, voice cracking. Please, just let me stay till I figure something out. Jasmine folded her arms tighter. You've had years to figure something out. We're done. Michael's face hardened with finality. This conversation is over, he said. Pack your things. The tremble in Thomas's hands became visible. His shoulders shook. His legs felt weak. That's enough, Mrs. Carla Jennings' voice cut from outside. They hadn't realized the front door had creaked open. She stood just outside on the porch, groceries in hand, eyes blazing. I can hear y'all all the way from my kitchen, she said. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. This doesn't concern you, Miss Jennings, Michael snapped, moving toward the door. It does, she shot back. When I watch a man who raised you be treated like he's some stray dog you picked up and got bored of. Thomas rubbed his face, humiliated. Carla, please, he murmured. It's all right. No, Thomas, it's not, she insisted. You gave those kids everything. I saw it. You took them in when nobody else wanted them. You worked yourself half to death, and this is how they repay you? Devin muttered, Here we go, someone else making him the victim. Jasmine glared. We're not doing this in front of the whole block. This is family business. Mrs. Jennings snorted. Family? 'Cause I ain't seeing much of that from your side. Michael opened the door wider, stepping onto the porch. Miss Jennings, please. We don't need your commentary. Behind him, Thomas hovered in the doorway, looking smaller than he had in decades. Michael, he tried, please. Michael turned sharply. You know what? He snapped, anger bubbling over. Let's stop pretending. He grabbed the old suitcase, sitting just inside the door. Thomas's suitcase, the one he'd brought with him when he first moved into this house as a husband and father. Without care, Michael dragged it across the porch and flung it near the steps. The neighbors across the street froze. A car slowed down. Someone peeked through their curtains. It felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. "Pack your things," Michael repeated, chest heaving. "We want the room back. You've been freeloading long enough." Thomas stood in the doorway, trembling. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Tears pricked his eyes. "You're not our real dad," Jasmine added, her voice breaking, but her pride still holding. "We owe you nothing." It was like being stabbed 4 times in the same wound. He felt dizzy. He steadied himself on the doorframe. Mrs. Jennings took a step toward him, eyes filled with tears of her own. "Thomas." And then Devon sealed it. "You're broke," he said coldly. "You're useless. And we're done pretending." The words echoed. "You're broke. You're useless. We're done pretending." Something inside Thomas went completely stye. He had never felt so small, so unwanted, so absolutely alone. He stared at them, not just at their faces now, but at their hearts and what they'd become. His voice, when it finally came, was no longer begging. It was just tired. "So that's what you think of me," he said quietly. None of them answered. Neighbors watched openly now. One woman shook her head in disbelief. A man whispered, "That's messed up," under his breath. Mrs. Jennings put a hand on Thomas's arm. "You come stay with me tonight if you need to. You hear me?" He nodded faintly, eyes never leaving his children. "I did my best by y'all," he whispered. "I hope one day you remember that." He took one slow step toward the suitcase. His hand was just reaching for the handle when the sound of an engine cut through the tension. A sleek, black SUV turned onto the street. It glided up the road, glossy and out of place among the older cars parked along the curb. Tinted windows, clean as if it had just rolled out. It slowed, then stopped right in front of Thomas's house. The kids glanced at it, annoyed by the interruption. "Who is that?" Devon muttered. "Probably somebody lost," Jasmine said. The driver's door opened with a quiet click. A sharply dressed man stepped out. Navy suit, polished shoes, crisp white shirt, tie pinned just right. He straightened, closed the door gently, and surveyed the scene on the porch. His eyes landed on Thomas. His expression shifted instantly, from professional neutrality to concern. He walked up the path with purpose, leather briefcase in hand. "Mr. Avery?" the man called, voice clear and respectful. Thomas blinked, stunned. "Yes." The man reached the bottom of the porch steps and offered a respectful nod. "Sir," he said, "the board is concerned. You missed the shareholder meeting." The street went silent. Jasmine frowned. "Shareholder?" Devon let out an incredulous laugh. "Shareholder? Him?" Michael stared, confusion battling with irritation. There must be some mistake. The man didn't even look at them. He kept his attention solely on Thomas. "Your company," he continued calmly, "is awaiting your approval on the $400 million expansion deal." Dead. Silence. The words hung in the air like they'd been shouted through a megaphone. Neighbors' jaws dropped. Mrs. Jennings' hand flew to her mouth. The Avery children went pale. $400 million. Thomas closed his eyes for a moment. The secret he'd buried for years, to live as just a simple man, had just arrived in a suit and parked itself in his front yard. Everything, every lie they believed about him, every insult they threw at him, Every assumption that he was old, broke, and useless was about to shatter, and not one of them was ready. For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind rustled the trees. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a screen door slammed shut. But the front yard, the porch, the people, they all froze. Thomas stood there, gripping the railing as if the world had tilted under his feet. His children looked stunned, confused, irritated, like reality had malfunctioned. Mr. Robert Hale, the man in the suit, adjusted his tie and glanced at Thomas's trembling hands. "Sir, are you all right?" he asked softly. Thomas tried to speak, but his throat locked. The humiliation of moments ago still clung to him like a weight he couldn't shake. Michael stepped forward, tone sharp. "Okay, what is this? This has to be some kind of mistake." Mr. Hale didn't even acknowledge him. Instead, he turned fully to Thomas, posture respectful, almost deferential. "Mr. Avery," he continued, voice clear enough for every neighbor within 50 feet to hear. "The board sent me personally. We've postponed the expansion vote twice, waiting for you." Jasmine blinked hard, eyebrows shooting up. Devon's mouth fell open. Mrs. Jennings whispered under her breath, "Lord have mercy, Thomas." Michael stepped closer, frustration rising. "What vote? What expansion? Why are you talking like he's some corporate executive?" Mr. Hale finally turned his eyes on the three children. When he spoke, his words were clipped and cool. "Because, young man, he is." The kids exchanged stunned looks. Mr. Hale continued, "Thomas Avery is the co-founder of Avery and Lane Logistics. He owns majority shares. He holds the controlling vote on the board. And he—" "Wait," Jasmine cut in, voice cracking. "Co-founder? Of what?" Mr. Hale blinked slowly, as if her ignorance was baffling. "Avery and Lane Logistics," he repeated. "One of the largest supply chain companies in the country. Your father's designs and patents still run half our long-haul distribution software." Devon stared at Thomas like he'd suddenly turned into a hologram. "Dad, you invented stuff?" Mr. Hale nodded. "Multiple innovations in route efficiency and delivery automation. He was one of the sharpest minds in the industry." Michael shook his head. No way. He worked at a warehouse." Thomas lowered his head. Mr. Hale stepped closer to him. "He chose to work simple jobs," he said gently. "After his wife passed away, he stepped away from corporate life. He requested his name be removed from most public documents. He told us he wanted to raise his children quietly. He wanted peace." The neighbors murmured, astonished. Mrs. Jennings' hand trembled on the porch railing. Jasmine's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but fear. "Dad," she whispered, "why didn't you tell us?" Thomas swallowed. When he finally raised his head, his eyes were wet. "Because y'all needed love," he said painfully. "Not money, not titles, not some big-shot father who is never home." He took a shaky breath. "When y'all came to me, tiny and scared and needing a home, I promised to give you everything I had. Not fancy things, not riches, just me." Michael whispered, stunned. "You're rich?" Mr. Hale corrected him immediately. "Not rich, wealthy." Devon stumbled back on the step. "How wealthy?" he croaked. Mr. Hale opened his briefcase and pulled out a leather folder. "Mr. Avery owns controlling shares worth approximately $860 million. Gasps erupted from the watching neighbors. Somebody dropped their grocery bag. A kid biking nearby hit the brakes so hard his tire screeched. Jasmine covered her mouth with both hands. Devon ran his fingers through his hair, shaking. Michael looked like he might faint. Mr. Hale continued, unbothered by their shock. He also owns significant real estate, earns annual royalties on intellectual property, and maintains multiple trust accounts created decades ago. Then he looked directly at the 3 grown children. You were living with a man who could buy this entire neighborhood 10 times over, and he let you believe he was struggling. He glanced at Thomas again, voice gentling. He didn't hide it because he was ashamed. He hid it because he cared more about raising you right than raising you spoiled. Thomas looked down, rubbing his thumb over the edge of the wooden railing. I wanted you to know kindness, he whispered. Not greed, not pride. I wanted you to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. Michael's voice cracked. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Thomas's eyes filled again. Because then every I love you would have felt like a transaction, he said softly. And I didn't want that, not from my babies. The words hit harder than any number. Jasmine's mascara smudged as tears spilled over. Devin stared at the ground, jaw trembling. Michael's breath came in shallow bursts. Mr. Hale closed the folder and clasped his hands. Sir, he said gently to Thomas, your signature is required soon. The board cannot proceed without your approval. We can escort you to headquarters whenever you're ready. The kids froze again. Escort? Devin echoed. To headquarters? Jasmine whispered. Mr. Hale nodded. Your father is one of the highest-ranking stakeholders in our entire organization. He is treated with utmost respect. The children flinched at that word. Respect. A word they had not given him in years. Mrs. Jennings stepped closer to Thomas, pride shining in her eyes. I knew you were a good man, she whispered, but I didn't know you were this. Thomas gave her a small, tired smile. I never wanted to be this if it meant forgetting how to be a father, he murmured. Then he lifted his suitcase, the same suitcase his children had thrown at his feet just minutes ago. He looked at them, not with anger, not with revenge, but with a heartbreak so deep it softened everything about him. You didn't want me, he said quietly, when you thought I had nothing. All 3 of them flinched as if struck. Mr. Hale placed a supportive hand on Thomas's back. Sir, he said gently, we can leave whenever you're ready. For the first time since he walked onto that porch, Thomas Avery stood tall, straight-backed, steady. A man reclaiming the dignity he'd willingly set aside for love. His children stared at him, not as a burden, not as old and useless, but as the father they never truly saw. And for the first time, fear filled their eyes. Because they finally understood. They hadn't just thrown out a man. They'd thrown out the greatest blessing they ever had. For a second, everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a gunshot, when everyone's still trying to decide if it really happened. Mr. Hale's words still hung in the air. Your father owns controlling shares worth approximately $860 million. The street felt like it had stopped breathing. Then everything came crashing in at once. Jasmine took a stumbling step forward, tears already spilling, voice high and shaky. Dad, wait, just wait a second. Devin shoved his hands into his pockets, eyes wide, fake laugh bubbling up. All right, okay, everybody chill. This is wild. Crazy, right? I mean, he turned to Thomas. Why didn't you say anything, old man? Michael swallowed hard, trying to gather himself, trying to put the world back into a shape he recognized. This doesn't change the fact that you should have told us, he snapped. We're your children. You kept us in the dark about everything. Jasmine spun toward him. Shut up, Mike, she hissed. Then back to Thomas, voice soft and syrupy. Daddy, please, come inside. We shouldn't be talking about all this out here, in front of everybody. Her tone was different now. No more edge, no more annoyance, no more superiority. Just sudden, desperate sweetness. Yeah, Dad, Devin jumped in quickly. Come on, don't stand out here. Let's go inside, sit down. We can make you breakfast or, whatever you want. Right, Mike? Michael hesitated, a split second too long, then forced a smile that looked like it hurt. Yeah, of course, he said. Dad, please, don't get in that SUV. We overreacted. We were stressed. We didn't mean what we said. Mrs. Jennings watched them with her arms folded, eyes narrowed. Funny, she muttered, just loud enough for the closest neighbor to hear. Soon as his bank account popped into the conversation, suddenly they remember how to act. Thomas heard it too. His fingers tightened around the handle of his suitcase. He looked at his children, really looked, at the way Jasmine's eyes kept flicking to Mr. Hale's briefcase, at the way Devin's breathing had gone shallow when the word millions dropped, at the way Michael's jaw clenched every time controlling vote was mentioned, like he was trying to do the math on his future in his head. He saw panic, fear, greed, but he didn't see love. Not yet. Dad, Jasmine whispered, stepping closer, reaching for his arm. We're so sorry. We were just frustrated. You know how life is. Bills, work, pressure. We took it out on you. We didn't mean any of it. Devin nodded fast. Facts. We were wildin'. You know we joke too much. Thomas didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't soften. Mr. Hale stood slightly behind him, watching the scene with polite detachment and a sharp eye that missed nothing. Michael's voice dropped, softer than usual. Dad, please, come inside. We'll fix things. We'll make space. You don't have to go anywhere. This is your home. Now everyone on the street leaned in. They'd just watched these same three throw him out like trash. Now they were suddenly loving, apologetic, welcoming. It didn't take a genius to see the change had nothing to do with their hearts. Everything to do with the money. Mr. Hale cleared his throat, projecting his voice just enough. For the record, he said calmly, Mr. Avery has more than one home if he wants it. The company provides multiple high-end residences for executive use, including a penthouse downtown. He doesn't need to stay anywhere he isn't wanted. Michael shot him a glare. This is between our family and our father. Hale raised an eyebrow. Was it? When you were throwing his belongings to the porch like garbage? A low murmur rippled through the neighbors. Jasmine's cheeks flushed. Dad, she pleaded again. They don't get it. They didn't grow up with us. They don't know everything you sacrificed. We do. Please don't walk away. Thomas looked at his daughter, the baby girl he'd once chased lightning bugs with in the yard, the little girl who used to fall asleep on his chest. Now she wanted him back with a desperation that, if he were a weaker man, might have sounded like love, might have fooled him. He turned slightly toward Mr. Hale. Tell them, he said softly. All of it. Mr. Hale nodded once, face grave. As I stated earlier, he announced, Mr. Avery is not just a shareholder. He is the primary founding partner of Avery and Lane Logistics. He opened the folder, again, and glanced at the papers. Though it was clear, he already knew them by heart. He owns majority shares, he continued, which gives him controlling interest in the company. He lifted his eyes to the kids. That means your father's vote has the power to approve or block any major acquisitions, expansions, or mergers. Devin blinked rapidly, trying and failing to look like he wasn't impressed. He also owns several commercial properties, Mr. Hale went on evenly, including logistic hubs, distribution centers, and office buildings under long-term lease to our firm and others. These generate significant passive income. Jasmine's breathing hitched. On top of that, Mr. Hale added, he receives royalties on several patented innovations used in our routing systems and automation software. Those alone are worth more annually than most people see in a lifetime. Someone down the street muttered, "Good Lord." And finally, he said, folding the papers neatly, Mr. Avery is the primary beneficiary and controller of multiple trust accounts set up years ago, whose combined assets place his personal net worth just under $1 billion. Devin let out a broken laugh. $1 billion? Michael stared at Thomas like he was seeing him for the first time. $1 billion. In their house, sleeping in a glorified storage room, cooking them breakfast, washing their dishes, paying their bills, and they'd treated him like a bill. Thomas didn't look proud. He didn't smirk. He looked tired. Bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that comes from giving until you're empty, and then being told you never gave enough. Jasmine stumbled forward, voice shaking. "Dad, we didn't know," she cried. "We would never have if we knew." Thomas cut her off gently, and that hurt more than if he'd shouted. "You shouldn't need to know someone's bank account," he said softly, "to know how to treat them." The words hung there, heavy, true, undeniable. Devin swallowed. "Dad, come on. You raised us. We love you." "When you thought I was broke," Thomas replied, "you called me useless, a burden, said I was eating your money in a house I paid for." Michael shook his head desperately. "We were wrong. We were angry. People say things they don't mean." Thomas's gaze sharpened. "That's the funny thing about words, son. They usually come from somewhere real." Mrs. Jennings nodded, murmuring, "Tell it, Thomas." He shifted his suitcase from one hand to the other. "You ignored me unless I was doing something for you," he said, voice quiet but strong. "You talked around me, over me. You asked me to stay in my room when your friends came over. You made jokes about my clothes, my food, my age." He paused, chest rising and falling. "And I let it slide," he admitted, "because I love you. Because I told myself, they're just stressed, they'll come around." His eyes glistened. "But this morning, you told me plain. You don't want me here. You want the room. You want your space. You called me broke, useless, said I wasn't your real dad." Michael winced visibly. Devin looked away, shame finally cracking through. Jasmine sobbed quietly. Thomas took a breath that shook on the way in and steadied on the way out. "Well," he said, "you were wrong about a lot of things." He glanced at Mr. Hale with a faint, ironic smile. "Clearly." A few neighbors chuckled softly, sad and impressed, all at once. Then his eyes returned to his children, and they weren't laughing anymore. "But there's one thing you were right about," he said. "I ain't your real dad by blood." He let that sit for a moment. "But I chose you," he whispered. "Every single one of you. I chose you when nobody else would. I chose you when judges asked, 'Are you sure?' I chose you when social workers warned me it would be hard." His voice broke. "And I'd choose you again," he admitted. "Even after all this, 'cause that's what love is." Tears ran down Jasmine's cheeks. Devin's lips trembled. "Dad." "But," Thomas continued, and now there was steel under the sorrow, "love without respect is just abuse in a prettier outfit." The crowd murmured again. He tightened his grip on the suitcase. "You didn't want me," he said, each word measured, "when you thought I had nothing." Silence. "You didn't want the man who read you stories when you had nightmares." His voice wavered. "You didn't want the man who walked miles 'cause he didn't have bus fare just so he could put food on your plates. A tear slid down his cheek. You didn't want the man who sat in emergency rooms with you, sat in principal offices for you, sat at job interviews holding your hand. He shook his head. You didn't want your father, he said. Not when you thought he was just some old man taking up space. He straightened. But now, you find out I'm rich? He looked at all three of them in turn. And suddenly you want me? Their faces crumpled. Jasmine tried to close the distance, reaching for him. Dad, we're sorry, she cried. Not because of the money. We swear. We're sorry because we were wrong. We were cruel. Maybe, he said softly. Maybe one day I'll believe that. Devin stepped forward too. Don't leave. We'll change. We'll do better. Thomas looked at him with a softness that hurt to see. I hope you do, he replied. But I can't stay here waiting for you to treat me like a human being. Michael's eyes shone with angry tears. So you're just gonna walk away? After raising us? After everything you said about never giving up on us? Thomas's smile was sad, not bitter. I ain't giving up on you, he said. I'm just not giving up on myself anymore either. He turned toward the SUV. Dad, Jasmine screamed, please, don't get in that car. Thomas took a single step forward. Dad, please, Devin shouted, voice cracking. He took another step. Michael's voice broke wide open. We're sorry, okay? Just don't leave us. Thomas paused with his hand on the SUV door handle. He looked back one last time. Tears shone in his eyes, but his voice was steady. I gave you a home, he said quietly. I gave you love. He glanced at the suitcase, then back at them. And you threw me out like trash. Behind him, Mrs. Jennings whispered, You tell him, Thomas. The children sobbed openly now, guilt finally catching up to them. He pulled the door open. Mr. Hale stepped aside respectfully as Thomas climbed slowly into the SUV, setting his suitcase beside him. The door closed with a heavy, final thunk. For the first time in their lives, Michael, Jasmine, and Devin knew what it felt like to watch someone they needed walk away from them. To feel a hand they'd always assumed would be there finally let go. The engine started. The SUV pulled away from the curb. The kids stood on the porch, crying, calling his name. But the car didn't stop, didn't slow down. It turned at the end of the street and disappeared, leaving them for the first time alone, really alone, with nothing but each other. And the echo of the one line they'd never forget. You didn't want me when you thought I had nothing. The SUV ride was painfully quiet. Mr. Hale didn't speak. Thomas couldn't. And the city around them passed by in muted blurs. Streetlights, stores, billboards, all blending into one long, numbing streak. Thomas sat with his hands folded on the suitcase in his lap, his posture small, as if he wanted to disappear into the leather seat. He wasn't thinking about money, or the company, or the penthouse waiting for him. All he could see were the faces of the 3 children he'd raised, the same faces he'd kissed goodnight, bandaged after scrapes, held during storms, faces twisted now with fear, regret, and too late apologies. He leaned his head back and shut his eyes. Mr. Hale glanced at him gently. If at any point you want to stop or talk, Thomas lifted a shaking hand. Please, son, just drive. So he did. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Cool, scented air rushed out, crisply filtered, faintly floral. The hallways gleamed. The floor numbers glowed softly instead of glaring. The silence was comfortable, not empty. Hale stepped out first. Thomas followed, slower, uncertain. "Sir, this floor is reserved for executive residence," Mr. Hale explained. "No neighbors, no noise. Security is 24/7. He held out a keycard. Thomas stared at it like it was something sacred. "Just tap for entry," Mr. Hale said gently. Thomas took the card between his fingers, his hand trembling. The door unlocked with a soft beep. He pushed it open and stepped inside, and stopped. The penthouse was beautiful. Not loud, not flashy. Beautiful in the way peace is beautiful. High ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Soft gray furniture, warm lighting. A kitchen with marble counters he'd never dare put a hot pan on. A bedroom bigger than his entire childhood house. And silence. A deep, restful silence. No footsteps stomping upstairs. No yelling. No complaining. No being told he took up space. Just quiet. A kind of quiet that made his throat close up. Mr. Hale set the suitcase gently by the door. "Sir, the company stocked the kitchen, cleaned the place, made sure everything was comfortable. If you need a driver, a chef, medical care, anything, we can have it available 24 hours. Thomas blinked, overwhelmed. I ain't never lived like this," he whispered. Mr. Hale smiled softly. "You earned it, sir." Thomas lowered his gaze. "My wife. She would have loved this. I used to tell her we'd live someplace fancy one day. But life got busy. Kids came. Bills came. Dreams changed." He swallowed. "She always said we'd get a place with a view." He walked toward the giant window. The city lights sparkled like jewels scattered across velvet. "She was right," he whispered. "Always was." A single tear rolled down his cheek. Mr. Hale respectfully turned away, giving him privacy. "Sir," he said gently, "I'll leave you to rest. I'll call tomorrow about the meeting." Thomas nodded. "Thank you, son." A moment later, the door shut quietly, and Thomas was alone. He stood in the center of the penthouse, looking around as if he'd intruded into someone else's life. Then, his knees buckled. He sank onto the couch, hands covering his face. And for the first time in years, he cried. Not the quiet, hidden tears he'd shed in his small room at his children's house. Not the muffled sobs into a pillow when they weren't home. He cried like a man whose heart had finally cracked open under the weight of years of unspoken pain. Cried for the love he gave. Cried for the cruelty he endured. Cried for the children he raised and the father they never truly saw. His shoulders shook, his chest tightened, his breath came in ragged gasps. Over and over, he whispered through tears, "I tried. Lord knows I tried." The Avery children sat on the living room floor, something they hadn't done since they were kids, surrounded by the silence their father used to fill. Jasmine cried quietly, knees pulled to her chest. Devon paced, swallowing hard, muttering curses at himself under his breath. Michael sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the doorway where the suitcase had been, where Thomas had stood, where they had broken him. Nobody spoke for a long time. Finally, Jasmine whispered, We really told him to leave." Devon stopped pacing. "We didn't know who he was." "Doesn't matter," she snapped, voice cracking. "We treated him like trash." Michael rubbed his face harshly. "We didn't think he'd actually go." Jasmine's voice softened into something raw. "Why would he stay?" Devon sank onto the couch. "We messed up." "No," a voice answered from the doorway. "Y'all didn't mess up." They turned. Mrs. Jennings stood there, arms crossed, eyes red. "You didn't just mess up. You broke that man." Jasmine's breath hitched. "Miss Jennings." "No." The older woman stepped inside the room with a firmness that made them shrink. I'm saying what somebody should have said a long time ago. She pointed at the empty hallway. That man loved y'all more than he ever loved himself. Michael's chin quivered. He gave you a home when the world gave you nothing. He worked himself to pieces so you could have shoes on your feet, books in your backpacks, food on your plates. Devin whispered, "We know." "No," she snapped. "No, you don't. You forgot. And the moment you thought he didn't have anything left to give, you tossed him out like he was clutter." She wiped a single tear. "You didn't lose a billionaire today." Her voice softened, trembling. "You lost your father." Silence fell like a blanket, suffocating the whole room. Jasmine broke first, sobbing into her hands. Devin looked sick, clutching his head. Michael's voice cracked. We have to fix this." Mrs. Jennings shook her head. "You don't fix betrayal with a phone call." She stepped back toward the door. "You fix it with change, with humility, with action, and nothing less." She paused. "And if you're lucky, he'll let you try." Then she left them alone again. Only this time, the silence hurt. It echoed. It condemned. And the three grown children finally understood the weight of the words they'd said. Thomas sat on the couch, staring at the night skyline through the massive window. He wasn't crying anymore, just breathing, slowly, deeply, steadily. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy. The walls didn't feel hostile. His presence didn't feel unwanted. He touched the arm of the couch gently, like testing reality. Then he whispered into the quiet, "I got more money than I know what to do with. And still, the thing I wanted most was just to be loved right." He leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. He wasn't angry, not anymore. He was grieving, for the years he'd lost, for the kindness he gave away 2F, for the man his children didn't see until it was too late. But beneath the grief, something else began to stir. Not revenge, not pride, but strength. The kind of strength that comes from finally choosing yourself. Thomas adjusted quickly to the penthouse life, not because of the luxury, but because of the peace. No yelling, no slammed doors, no whispered complaints about him eating their money. Just quiet mornings, soft lights, and the view of a city he helped build but never bragged about. Within a week, he was back in board meetings. The executives greeted him with respect, real respect. They listened when he spoke. They stood when he entered. The same man who had been told he was useless was now the deciding vote on multi-million-dollar expansions. His voice mattered. For the first time in years, he felt seen. But he didn't let success swallow him. He used it to uplift others. He visited shelters quietly, slipping donations in envelopes. He funded youth programs under anonymous foundations. He offered scholarships in his wife's name. Every act of giving stitched another torn corner of his heart. Then, one morning, his phone buzzed. A message from Michael. "Dad, can we talk, please?" He ignored it. An hour later, another from Jasmine. "We're sorry. We don't want anything from you. Just a chance to see you." Still, he said nothing. By evening, Devin sent a voice note, his voice shaking. "Dad, we were wrong. All the way wrong. Not 'cause of money. 'Cause we forgot how to love you right." That one made Thomas sit down. He didn't reply, but he didn't delete it either. 2 days later, all three stood in the lobby of his building, waiting nervously as he stepped out of the elevator. They looked smaller somehow, like the weight of their choices had finally settled on their shoulders. Michael spoke first. His voice was raw. Dad, we're sorry. Truly. We treated you like you were nothing, and you were everything. Jasmine wiped her tears. We don't deserve your forgiveness, but we're asking for a chance to earn it. Devin stepped forward last. Dad, we forgot who raised us. That ain't your failure. It's ours. Thomas looked at each of them quietly. Then he sighed. I forgive you, he said softly. Their relief was immediate, but short-lived, because he wasn't done. But forgiveness don't mean things go back the way they were. They nodded, accepting it. He continued, if you want to be in my life, it has to be with respect, not expectation, not entitlement. Yes, they all said at once. He studied them, really studied them, and for the first time in a long time, he saw humility, he saw remorse, he saw growth, and maybe, just maybe, he saw the beginnings of the family he'd always hoped they'd become. He set new boundaries. They would visit him. He wouldn't move back. They would earn access to his trust funds through community service. They would attend therapy together, as a family. And they agreed. Gladly, even gratefully, because now they understood. A man like Thomas Avery was worth far more than his money. The city looked different from the penthouse rooftop garden, quieter, calmer, almost softer under the late afternoon sun. Thomas Avery stood with his hands resting lightly on the railing, watching a group of young volunteers unloading boxes into the community center below. They laughed, passed supplies down the line, teased each other gently, exactly the way he'd always hoped his own children would treat people. This center, this bright, warm place bustling with life, existed because of him. Because after everything he'd endured, he still believed in giving, still believed in building. A soft voice came from behind him. Mr. Avery, the kids loved the books you donated. One of the youth program directors smiled at him. Your support changed this place. Thomas nodded humbly. Just trying to do a little good. She walked off, leaving him alone with his thoughts, and with the light breeze brushing gently against his gray curls. Down below, he spotted someone familiar stepping out of a car. Mrs. Carla Jennings. She held a container wrapped in a dish towel. He smiled before she even reached him. Afternoon, Thomas, she said as she stepped onto the rooftop. Brought you some peach cobbler, still warm. You're spoiling me, he chuckled, taking it gratefully. That's what happens when you treat people right, she teased. Good comes back eventually. He looked out over the city again. Didn't feel like it for a long time. She touched his arm softly, but it came back when you stopped letting folks walk all over you. He took a long, slow breath, one that felt like letting go. Funny thing, he said quietly, all those years, I thought I was poor because I didn't live like this, because I chose to stay simple. He looked at Mrs. Jennings, eyes warm. But I wasn't poor. Not ever. I was rich in the only ways that mattered. He thought of his children, the way they now hugged him without pretending, the way they spoke softly instead of sharply, the way they asked how he was and waited for the answer. They were trying, growing, healing, and so was he. They forgot what love looked like, he whispered, but they're learning again. He set the cobbler aside and rested both hands on the railing, letting the sun warm his skin. Family ain't just blood, he said. It's how you treat the hearts that trust you. It's how you show up. It's who you choose. He watched a little girl below tug her mother toward the volunteer table, excited to help. That was what he cared about now. Building something that lasted beyond money, beyond property, beyond legacy. Something rooted in kindness. Something real. Mrs. Jennings smiled beside him. "I'm proud of you, Thomas." He chuckled softly, trying to be proud of myself too. They stood in silence for a few peaceful moments, the kind that didn't need filling. Finally, he whispered, "Life tried to make me small, tried to tell me I wasn't worth nothing. But love, real love, don't disappear." He straightened, shoulders back, chin lifted just enough to show strength without arrogance. "It just waits," he said. "Waits for you to claim it again." The city wind brushed past him, carrying away the last pieces of the man who stayed quiet while others dimmed his light. Now he stood tall, seen, respected, loved, and as the sun dipped lower, painting the skyscraper's gold, Thomas Avery smiled, a soft, peaceful smile, shaped by every scar he survived, because he finally understood his worth was never tied to what he had, but to who he'd been all along, period.